This is a story of betrayal, but this one takes the cake. In 2015, the Genovese crime family had a major problem. Their boss was in prison for racketeering and extortion, and to make matters worse, they needed someone to testify against him. This wasn't going to be easy because the Genovese were extremely tight-lipped. They didn't talk to the feds, not ever. And even if they did, there was a serious risk of retaliation from their fellow mobsters. The pressure was on, and they had to find a new boss. And it had to be somebody willing to turn rat. Enter Michael Franzesi, a.k.a. Junior. Now, he wasn't the first choice, but when everybody else said no, the family had to settle for him. See, Michael wasn't exactly loyal to the family. He was more loyal to himself. To his fellow mobsters, he was known as a snitch. He would often spill secrets and confidential information just to seem important. He loved the sound of his own voice and was very quick to point fingers. In fact, he was responsible for at least 3 murders and was even involved in a contract killing when he was only 15 years old. And that was why he was called Junior. This guy was basically the worst of the worst. So imagine how desperate the Genovese were to have him as their new boss. Michael was extremely cocky, and after getting the job, he started running his mouth even more than before. He would call up rival mobsters and yell at them, "You're dead." He thought he was untouchable now, but behind his back, people were already planning his demise. One man in particular was plotting revenge, Anthony Senorino, also known as Tony the Goon, or T. But what does the name Tony the Goon tell you about this guy? Yep, he was a violent man. He was also Michael's cousin. The two would meet up every Sunday for dinner with some other relatives. It was during one of these dinners that Tony decided he couldn't hold back anymore. He wanted to send a message to Michael. So in front of everybody, Tony took off his jacket. It was a clear sign of aggression, and it meant things were about to get real ugly. Michael was livid. He was furious with his cousin. But in front of everybody, all he could do was keep his cool. He knew Tony was dangerous. If he started throwing punches, it would quickly turn into a brawl, and nobody wanted that. The next day, Michael tried to confront Tony, but he denied any wrongdoing. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then Michael turned to his uncle, who was also Tony's father, and asked him to control his son. But he refused, and that's when Michael made a huge mistake. He threatened Tony's father, saying, "I'm going to make you disappear." That was the last straw for Tony. His father might have been a mobster, but he was still a loving parent. So when Michael threatened him, Tony snapped. That same night, Tony went to the local gym to work out his anger. When he left, he got into his car and drove to Michael's house. He parked down the block and then walked toward his target. He knew where Michael lived. After all, they were related, and he had visited many times before. What he didn't know was that Michael was home and waiting for him. The moment he saw Tony approaching, Michael grabbed his gun and hid behind the door. As soon as Tony reached his porch, he heard a loud bang and immediately fell to the ground. He looked back and saw Michael standing over him with a gun in his hand. It shot him right in the head. But here's where the story gets a little weird. You see, Michael had actually missed. He hadn't meant to kill Tony. All he wanted to do was scare him, but Tony didn't run away. He didn't even try to defend himself. Instead, he laid there and pretended to be dying. Why? Because he had made the whole thing up. It was a setup. You see, Tony had been arrested for possession of a controlled substance. He knew he was in trouble and needed Michael's help to get out of it. But when he asked his cousin for assistance, Michael refused. So Tony hatched a plan. He confronted Michael at the Sunday dinner, hoping to provoke him. But Michael wouldn't take the bait. So Tony had no choice but to go to his house and try to force him to help. And that's when Michael shot him. Michael panicked. We had made it for you. So Michael did play why. So Wyke, 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 and that's what I end. But any redders, if I wanna, I'll say if Wyke is it and I'll so why with phi white. I as I wanna say it as why is why I is why I say it as why I is as I is I why I is I I tried. He knew that if Tony survived, he would testify against him and get him locked up. So he called up a friend and told him to get rid of the body. But when the police found out what had happened, they suspected foul play. They searched Michael's house and found the murder weapon. They also discovered a bloody meat cleaver. It had been used to smash Tony's skull. First, Michael tried to convince everyone that Tony had tried to break into his house and that's why he shot him, but the police weren't buying it. So he changed his story and said that Tony had threatened his family and that's why he acted in self-defense. Problem was, the evidence didn't match his story. There were no signs of forced entry, and witnesses had seen Tony walking toward Michael's house, not running. Plus, there was that pesky security camera footage. Michael had actually shot Tony in broad daylight. A neighbor had seen the whole thing and had recorded it on her surveillance camera. Michael was arrested and taken into custody. He was charged with murder, but he continued to claim innocence. Even in court, he stuck to his story, saying, "I swear to God I was defending myself." But the judge and jury didn't believe him. They saw the evidence and heard the recordings. They knew what really happened. Michael was sentenced to 25 years in prison. But here's where the story gets even weirder. You see, Michael had testified against his own family in the past. He'd turned rat. That's why he was promoted to boss. So when he went to jail, the Genovese weren't angry at him. They were pissed off at Tony for getting killed by a rat. Like, seriously, what was Tony thinking? I mean, sure, Michael had set him up, but come on, who sets up a rat? I mean, they're supposed to be the ones getting set up. It was like Tony had forgotten who he was dealing with. And to add insult to injury, the commission had to pay $1 million to Tony's family for getting whacked. But hey, at least Michael got his comeuppance. Spent 28 years in prison before being released in 2023. And we can only hope that he learned his lesson. But let's be real, this is the Mafia we're talking about. So chances are he's already gotten himself into more trouble since being released. Speaking of getting yourself into more trouble, have you ever accidentally posted something online that you shouldn't have? It happens to the best of us. Maybe you shared a video you didn't mean to, or maybe you posted a private message publicly. Well, don't worry, because we've all been there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.